Hello and welcome to the Miko Bits show. And this is where we follow the latest trends in Bitcoin, blockchain, and DeFi. So we have today an exciting show with Tascha Punyaneramitdee from Alpha Finance Labs, which is, of course, the creator of the Alpha Homora system. And it is really a powerful protocol with some incredible traction. So, it's really a big deal. So I'm very kind of excited. I'm really excited to, really learn more from Tascha. So, just a quick note, this is an opinion and information show. So it is not investment advice. So if you do seek investment advice, get professional help, as they sometimes say. So Tascha, welcome to the show.
Hi, glad to be here.
Yeah, so let's start with yourself. So, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and, how did you, go on this incredible journey?
Yeah, so it's been, time just flies in DeFi, right? And I think it got all started when I went to UC Berkeley and I got interested in crypto. Personally, I like finance already. So I studied economics at UC Berkeley, and you know how Berkeley and the Bay Area are very crypto friendly, blockchain friendly, technology savvy space. So that's how I got exposed to that area, joined a number of clubs, and also traded myself. And then, as time goes on, studied more about Bitcoin and then Ethereum. And then when DeFi comes into the picture, that's when I got really, really excited when, finance and technology are merging in, a completely new way. So I've been following the space for quite some time. And then, after UC Berkeley, I started my career in traditional finance. So I went into investment banking in San Francisco and then in London. And then after that, I joined Tencent as a product manager, so shifting more towards tech. And then after that, I joined Band Protocol as a head of strategy, so
Wow.
entering the blockchain space. And then after that, when I was at Band Protocol, I really dig deeper into DeFi and trying to understand what are the market gaps are there, see what else could be built to actually push DeFi to the next steps. And then that's when I left Band Protocol to start Alpha Finance with co-founder Nipun. And Nipun also brings really strong tech and quant background. I can talk a whole hour with his credentials. So yeah, that's where I came from, and also the history of Alpha.
Wow, that is truly amazing. And, obviously, Band Protocol has some roots as well in Thailand. So that's an interesting connection. I don't know if that's part of the story at all.
Yeah, I mean the space is really it's small, right? In global crypto, global DeFi in general. So you can imagine how small it is in just Thailand. So everyone pretty much know each other in the space, even if they're not in DeFi, even if they're just trading crypto, or even if they are starting a new DeFi project, we pretty much know everyone because it's quite a small community here.
That's fantastic. Well, that's very exciting. And so I guess let's jump right into it. So I would love to hear the problem that you're solving, because obviously you're solving a big problem for a lot of people because, your TVL is astronomical, like your things are incredibly growthful. So I'd love to understand how you think about and reason about the problem.
Yeah, so that's when I think it gets more interesting with what we're building at Alpha Finance Lab. So instead of focusing on one particular area or a sector of DeFi, right? So we're actually going to focus on the end goal of what we're going to achieve for the users. So we think that the end goal that we want to achieve is how pretty much maximizing the returns and minimizing the downside risks for users. And we think that, that's the ideal goal of financial product suites, right? Because no one's going to use the product if they cannot maximize the returns. Versus, if maximizing the returns and they don't know how to hedge the risk or there's no way to hedge that risk, then that's also not ideal. So when we come up with that goal instead of a particular sector that we want to focus on, then we kind of backtrack to see how do we get to that goal. And pretty much to get to that goal, it's pretty much that we need to build a number of alpha products to work together to achieve that goal, because it's pretty much, very hard to optimize for everything for one product. And especially on blockchain too, there are a lot of limitations on that. So in order to get that goal, we need a number of alpha products to work together, right? So that's where kind of backtracking to Alpha Homora. So for Alpha Homora, we're focusing on maximizing the returns for the users. And pretty much we found that like the lending rates on DeFi are actually pretty good, but we were actually spotting an opportunity starting from Ethereum lending, right? As there are a lot of ETH lenders and they are actually bearing quite low lending interest rate on ETH. And we think that if we can find a way to engineer an innovation on the borrowing side, then we would be able to unlock a really high lending interest rate on ETH and, capture a huge demand from ETH lenders, right?
Yeah.
So that's where it came from for the first version of Alpha Homora. And the way that we innovate on the borrowing side is by doing leveraged yield farming. So it's the first time that leveraged yield farming came into the picture in DeFi. And I think that, received pretty well product market fit, because there are a lot of yield farmers in the space, and they're still going to search for higher yields because the yields nowadays are not as high as, June last year.
Yes.
So they're still going to search for higher yields. And this is the mechanism that allows them to get that higher yields without having to do all of the steps manually. And vice versa, the lenders would be able to get the high lending interest rate on ETH because of these leveraged borrowers who are actively borrowing these ETH to do more yield farming. So that's pretty much, the backstory of Alpha Homora. And in the future or later questions, I can also explain more of like why we decided to build V2, what's the differences, and then what are the other alpha products that we're going to build. But you can see the whole picture that it's going to work as a whole ecosystem. So Alpha Homora is one of the products that we're going to build. And at the end of the day, the whole ecosystem would achieve the goal of maximizing returns and minimizing the downside risks.
So similar to the YFI ecosystem, like, do you intend for the alpha to essentially unify, like that there is a sort of a unified governance mechanism and token?
Yeah, so alpha is, the main token that will unify all of the alpha products. And pretty much there are a number of utilities that are actually coming up. We're working on the tokenomics right now, so that should be interesting as well. And not just fees collection and value accrual, but also something creative and something new that we are experimenting with.
So Alpha intends then to be the unifying governance token for the ecosystem?
Yep, so that is the case as well. So it's governance, value accrual, as well as something different that we're experimenting on.
But there will also be additional tokens that may arise from the ecosystem as well?
No, so it will be only alpha
Okay.
that will govern the whole alpha products.
Super helpful. Thank you. It's a very important distinction and really interesting, right? Because obviously when you look at something like YFI, we've seen an incredibly prolific production of different, ecosystem vaults and components, right? So I think that's been an incredibly inspiring thing to see and a very productive team. So I think that's a great source of inspiration for me. I think the fascinating thing to try to understand too is what are the numbers like? So I know that you have incredible traction, but maybe you can kind of review for us like some of the numbers coming out recently.
Yeah, so the stats you mean, right?
Yeah,
For
yeah.
alpha.
Yep.
Yeah, so Alpha Homora V1 and V2 are, about 1 billion total value lock. And Alpha Homora V1 we launched in October last year, so October 2020. And Alpha Homora V2 we just launched this past Monday. So it's been a week of Alpha Homora V2, or less than a week, yeah. So, 1 and 2 combined are about 1 billion.
Amazing.
And we're going to add a lot more pools to V2 because V2 has a lot more functionalities, allowing us to support more pools. So as a result, the total value would also grow from here.
Yeah, that's amazing and wonderful, and it's really great to see such prolific performance. And I think it's also exciting from the perspective of thinking about this, the governance element. Obviously, it's really interesting to see. The reason why I asked about sort of the token system and structure is that we do have things like protocol labs, and they of course have Filecoin, which is of course a separate token and a different structure, right? So I think they may intend to release future projects, but they may also release them under different token names potentially. So it's a differently structured from some of these popular comparables. But I do think it's very exciting. And I guess for me, what I would love to get into is, the name is interesting. I think is it from Harry Potter? Is that a fair thing to say?
Homora, right?
What is it?
Alpha Homora, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it actually got inspiration from Harry Potter, from the spell Alpha Homora, which is to unlock the door. So here it's
Oh.
unlock fields.
Oh, that is fantastic. Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciated that. I saw some branding with little lightning bolts that kind of looked Harry Potter, so I thought there might be a connection there, and that's fantastic, and it's really fun. So what I would love to do is talk about where alpha comes from, right? So I believe that there are three different sources of primary yield. I would say one of the sources is really what I call the Bitcoin source. And the Bitcoin source to me is basically government money printing, right? So if you look at any kind of pairs and you measure them, then against something like US dollars, you're going to see yield increase because the value is going to go up against the dollar, right? The dollar may be going down, value may be going up. So that's primary yield. I would say that another source of yield is risk, right? And people getting wrecked, right? So if someone else gets wrecked, then you can get a gain, right? And then I would say that the third source of yield, the way I look at it, is kind of primary net new value creation, right? So if you create a net new service, for example, like NFT art, right? If you create an NFT art that's never existed before and someone can own it, that's actually new economic value creation. I mean, it's funny to call it yield. I'm calling it yield in quotes, but like, where does the value, where's this economic value coming from? So I guess I would be really interested to understand kind of how you see the sources of yield, right? Because I think that probably the largest source of yield above the baseline, and I think the baseline is something like a Bitcoin yield, but above the baseline, like what are the where's the yield coming from? How do you see the concept of alpha?
Mm-hmm. I think there are several places where the yields come from. Let me just start first from Alpha Homora as a product itself,
Yep.
and then I'm gonna talk more about what it means to token holders and value accrual, right?
Yep.
So Alpha Homora itself, there are three parts of yields. So the first part is yield farming APY, which means that let's say if you provide liquidity to Sushi Swap and you stake the LP token, you would get sushi. So that's an additional yield that you would get. So with Alpha Homora, that yield farming APY gets amplified because of your leverage level. So let's say if you open at a 2x leverage, then the number of sushi that you would get would just times two from what you would otherwise get.
Yep.
So that's number one, right? Number two is the trading fees for providing liquidity to the AMM. So that's the same as well. If you are providing liquidity on Alpha Homora at 2x leverage, then the trading fees that you would get are times two of what you would otherwise get. And then the last one is Alpha APY, which is the current liquidity mining that we're running. So that can also be pretty much helping users to migrate from V1 to V2, and we're using this incentives to drive that migration. And Alpha APY is distributing to those who borrow, which means that you have to open leverage positions of more than 1x. So those are the three sources of yields for Alpha Homora users.
Yep.
And then for on the opposite side, for the lenders side on Alpha Homora, their yields are coming from a lot of the, borrow interest APY that the borrowers are paying are going to these lenders.
Yeah.
So last time that I checked, the lending interest rate on stable coins are about 30+%.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's pretty high. And for ETH itself, it used to be about 8% before we started migrating more lending from V1 to V2. So now it's about 3%, because there are a lot more lenders now in V2 than V1. So we're going to, making sure the migration process is smooth and slow to not, to not make the APY too drastic of a change. So that's for Alpha Homora, right? And then for Alpha Finance Lab itself, I think the value of the token would actually come from several parts. So as mentioned earlier, that Alpha Finance Lab is building a number of alpha products itself. So we're pretty much the way that we are thinking is that all the fees collection would go to all token holders. So the token holders don't have to pick where they want to stake, if they want to stake on Alpha Homora, if they want to stake on Alpha X, and then get the fees for that particular product. So we don't have that mindset. We actually have a mindset of the whole ecosystem. So we're pretty much all the fees from all the whole ecosystem would go back to the stakers, and that's pretty much what we're working right now. And I think that would be pretty important for all the token holders to participate in the whole alpha ecosystem.
Phenomenal. So in terms of the kind of borrowers, like what is the mechanics of collateralization? Like how do you see that problem?
Yeah, so with Alpha Homora, the difference between, let's say, Alpha Homora versus the other lending protocols is that Alpha Homora is born to just borrow to yield farm. So that's the only purpose that people would borrow, right? It's not in a case that users would borrow and then they get the assets in their wallet and then they do anything with it. In this case, the assets that they borrow are actually not going into their wallet, but it's on their position on Alpha Homora. So what that means that Alpha Homora is borrowing on their behalf and then yield farming on their behalf. So as a result, all the assets are being held by Alpha Homora in LP token, worth. So because of this concept, then that means that Alpha Homora can offer under collateralized loans. So for instance, with the Curve 3 pools, which is USDT, USDC, USD, or DAI, users can go pretty high, like about 7x leverage.
Wow.
And that's because of this mechanism that Alpha Homora holds the LP token. And the reason that Curve 3 pool gets higher leverage than if you were to go into ETH sushi pool is because Curve 3 pool are all stable coins. So the 7x leverage already have a really huge buffer, allowing stable coins to swing for 30%. So before liquidation happens, which is unlikely, but can happen when one stable coin loses its peg.
Yeah, of course. And, that's really, in a way, like these kinds of yields never appear without various risks. So, how would you characterize the risks associated with, this system?
Yeah, so starting from the lenders, the most or the less risky type of users, the risk would be when let's say positions or leverage positions on Alpha Homora get underwater, which means that debt is more than collateral that they supply. Then that means that the lending pool itself would not grow, because the collateral, pretty much the debt would be coming up from the lending pool, right? When that happens, though, we have several mechanisms. Number one is we're actually collecting 20% of the fees from borrowers as an insurance. So instead of tapping into the lending pool, this Alpha Homora product would actually tap into this insurance fund to cover that underwater positions first. So that's number one. Number two is that even at liquidation point, the leverage positions are actually not underwater. So we have another buffer offering about, each asset has different buffer parameter in terms of how much the asset can swing. for instance, at liquidation point, the stablecoin assets can swing additional 10% before the position becomes underwater. And then that parameter just grows for the other assets that are more risky, right? So what that means is that it doesn't mean that positions are underwater right at liquidation point.
I
So
see.
we mitigate by that point by that way.
That's exciting. Have you had to make insurance pool payouts at this point?
No, not yet.
Okay, that's good. I mean, it's always good to kind of see the growth and see it continue to stack up because that gives people more comfort. So that's really exciting. So I'd love to kind of talk about V2. So maybe you can kind of dip a little bit into the V2, Alpha
Yeah,
Homora.
sure. So V2, completely new look, new functionalities, and the way that we think about it is that V2 is going to take Alpha Homora to even the next level, because of several things. Number one, it doesn't only support SushiSwap and Uniswap, which is what Alpha Homora V1 support. So instead of those two AMM protocols, we also support Curve and Balancer. So what that means is that we're covering majority of the AMM or liquidity pools in the space already. And depending on the security of each pool, volatility of the assets, we can support any of the pool on these four AMMs to offer leverage on. So that's the whole space, right? And then after that, we can evaluate which pool we would want to support or not, depending on the safety mechanism. So that's number one.
Yep.
Number two is that when leverage farmers come on to Alpha Homora V2, they don't only have to borrow ETH. They can borrow a lot more assets. For instance, for Curve 3 pool, they can borrow USDT, USDC, or DAI in any proportion that they want. Or even, in the future pools where we have, for instance, ETH YFI that we're going to launch pretty soon, users can also borrow a portion of ETH, a portion of YFI, or only YFI as well. So the number of assets that you can borrow are, going to be an expansion of assets. So that leads me to the third point, which means that there are going to be lenders of all of these assets because there are borrowers, then there has to be lenders, right?
Sure.
So right now on Alpha Homora V2, there are lenders of ETH, USDT, USDC, and DAI. But then going forward, when we add more assets that are applicable for borrowers to borrow, then the lenders can also lend those assets like YFI, DPI, SNX, and go on. The list goes on pretty long.
Amazing. Yeah, that's very exciting. So I would say, what are your sources of inspiration? You definitely seem to be prolific in cranking out like new product.
I think it comes from three sources. If I were to come up with where inspiration come from, sometimes it's just walking around the house and then you thought of something, right? But generally, the first thing is that we have a lot of session within the team to come up with new ideas. So the new ideas are not just coming from me or Nipun, but pretty much from the engineers using that product, seeing that this feature should be added on Alpha Homora, or spotting a new market gap. So the team is pretty much passionate in DeFi and like a heavy user of DeFi protocols.
Yep.
So I think that really helps. The second is investors. So we maintain a really close relationship and also updates with investors. So whenever the investor themselves have several ideas, they would bounce like, hey, what do you think of this? This should actually add to the whole Alpha ecosystem. And then I would, bounce more with my team, think more of like other possibilities that could come out of it. And then the third one is pretty much the community. The community, not in a sense of just the partners that we're working with, but also community members. So I think when Alpha Finance Lab creates Alpha Homora, which is quite innovative, I think people are a lot more open to throw different ideas out because they know that we're open to listening to different ideas and seeing which one would work and then adapt it. So that's why Alpha Finance Lab Discord is pretty active. Some people would just write an essay long of their idea, and then we would just talk about it and then bounce the ideas on Discord.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of future roadmap and kind of leaning a little bit towards kind of like the bigger picture vision. So, how do you see the next things, the road ahead?
Yeah. So the road ahead, there are going to be a number of alpha products going to launch this year. And the first product that we have been talking, in addition to Alpha Homora, right, is Alpha X. And Alpha X is a completely in a different area. So it's not in leveraged farming or not in lending at all. It's actually in a non-order book, decentralized perpetual swap trading.
Wow.
And the way that we are tackling that is actually very different than other perpetual swap protocols. And we think that we're actually not competing with them because of who we're targeting are different from what they are targeting. And I'm going to talk more about Alpha X later on, but to answer your question, Alpha X would actually help bring synergy to Alpha Homora V2, because when we launch Alpha X, Alpha Homora V2 users would be able to hedge their positions on Alpha X. So let's say you are borrowing 10 ETH or on Alpha Homora V2 to do leverage yield farming, you're getting that gains from leverage yield farming, right? But then you would also be able to hedge your risk. So there would be a simple UI that will guide you to hedge your risk. For instance, a button to hedge, and then you would go to Alpha X, and then it would prompt you to all the steps saying that, okay, you're borrowing 10 ETH from Alpha Homora, thus you should open this position, which will automatically, give you a market neutral leverage position, and you just click confirm. So it's going to be a nice integration between Alpha X and Alpha Homora. So
That's
that's
fantastic.
before we, launch new products, it's going to always have the synergy.
Yeah, I'm very curious about the design of the Alpha X, and you mentioned the order book. So I'd love to kind of delve a little bit into that to try to understand, what's new about this.
Mm-hmm. So it's a non-order book perpetual swap trading product.
Okay.
The differences are not on the whether it's order book or non-order book. The differences is that the way that we're looking at perpetual swap trading on DeFi is that we think we want to capture users who are in DeFi who may not be trading perpetual swap now, but want to, and may not want to because it's complicated. Maybe it's because of the funding rate payment, maybe it's because rebalancing concept, and there are many things that are pretty complicated with perpetual swap, right? But they just want to get the output of it, which is, let's say ETH goes up by $100 and they want $1,000 instead. So if they want that in output, they would be able to use Alpha X without even having to understand what perpetual swap product or what perpetual swap trading is. And the way that we do it is that several things. So the first thing is we simplify the whole funding rate concept. We actually bake in the funding rate payment concept into the price. So what that means is users cannot come in to Alpha X, they buy at a certain price, they don't have to go through any funding payments at all, and then they close their position at a certain price. And these two prices, the entry price and the exit price, already have baked in the funding rate mechanism, which means that they don't have to go through the funding payments themselves, and they can just really calculate the net profit or losses from the two, entry and exit prices, which are pretty similar to like spot trading, in our opinion.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, to me, these kinds of innovations, it's almost like you're building almost like a Zapper Fi for Alpha, right? You're kind of creating these abstractions that enable users to have kind of their conceptual experience as opposed to really what's happening in the contract layer, which is maybe a little bit more complicated.
Mm-hmm. My favorite feature though for Alpha X is tokenizing positions. So, and I think that will be where a lot of utilities and innovation would come from for Alpha X as well. So once users open their leverage positions on Alpha X, they would get a tokenized positions. We don't want to call it leverage tokens because they don't work like leverage tokens on, let's say, FTX or Binance. But they are actually, literally tokenizing that position for the users. So the users can actually use that ERC20 token in the other protocols. So let's say in Uniswap or in other lending protocols. So that's where a lot of our work would have to come in when we launch Alpha X to really grow that utility of these tokenized positions.
So it's a bit like C token in Compound, right? It's sort of it represents your position.
Correct. Yeah.
Wow, that's very exciting. It's really interesting and very prolific. So I think it really neat that you're kind of structured in a labs way. So I think that's really exciting. So I guess one of the things I'd love to get your comment on is what are your kind of pocket picks? The projects that you think are underappreciated, projects that you think are exciting, growthful, obviously not investment advice, but, things that you think are just wonderful.
Yeah, I actually think there are a number of like the pretty much like the index protocols, right? I think that is where um, more people would be able to just enter DeFi through these index protocols because let's say if they want to just get an exposure in DeFi and there are so many DeFi tokens
Like
and they
set
just
protocol or what kinds of
for instance, like DPI, that's the index that I'm pretty much referring to,
yeah.
and the likes, right? So there are several of these, but what I'm thinking is the DPI index, and I think that is gives pretty good exposure to let's say people who are trying to study DeFi, and not sure what to pay their attention to yet, but pretty much want to get skin in the game and pretty much get the first step into
I
DeFi.
love that.
So of having to pick, okay, are they gonna invest in Alpha or Aave or SNX or anything? They can just invest in DPI first and then trying to understand these DeFi protocols before expanding to more DeFi protocols when they get more comfortable. So I think that's what I like about it, not just targeting the people in the DeFi already, but pretty much helping DeFi to expand the user base as well.
No, I really appreciate that because it really speaks to what you said earlier about your goals as a company and organization or project, right? Because in a sense, like you're saying, here's a financial product that fits a specific user at a specific time in their life cycle, right? So in a sense, you're saying, you want to generate a bunch of products, and you want to make it easier and better for everyone, right? So that's less risk, more yield, and easier to use, right? And so I think that's it's amazing, and I really appreciate the kind of product mindset. So I think you have a tremendous background for this type of work, which is it's just fascinating because I think DeFi is a new area. So people do come from a lot of different backgrounds, but I think the product background is really incisive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting meeting people from all walks of life, and kind of, coming together to build in DeFi.
Wonderful. So I like to also do a segment which is called shout outs. So, if you have people, we've already mentioned a few, but, obviously folks from your team as well. But, anybody who's been helpful or anyone who you think is underappreciated, so this is kind of the humans version of Pocket Picks. So, if you have any shout outs to make, it's definitely most welcome here.
Yeah, so there are pretty much two main shout outs I want to do. One is of course Nipun.
Yeah.
He is our co-founder and he's the brain behind a lot of these. So not a lot of people would be familiar with him because I'm the one in front of the camera and everything, right? But I think he deserves a lot of the credits too. And he pretty much is ranked the third in the global mathematics ranking.
Amazing.
So he doesn't only lead the team on the technical fronts, but he pretty much making sure that all the parameters, all the way that we implement things are safe. And I think that's really key because everything that we do revolves around numbers, right? Like how much can you collateralize, how much can you go, the leverage level that you can borrow. So numbers are really, really important. So Nippon is the first one. The second person I want to shout out is Andre for sure.
Yeah.
He reached out to me when Alpha Homora V1 was still pretty small,
Amazing.
and he loved the product. And then he pretty much started bouncing the idea with me. And then one of the ideas that he brought in is, why don't we expand to stable coins, which pretty much align with what we were thinking as well. So the fact that he gave that idea and bounced with us accelerated that timeline of Alpha Homora V2. And since then we have maintained a very good relationship with him. And what we do at Alpha Homora, we're also making sure to help grow Yearn ecosystem, even though we're not in the Yearn ecosystem. But I think it's more of like we respect him and we want to help, Yearn ecosystem as well. And I think it's become a mutually beneficial relationship because Yearn also wants to help Alpha Homora, as Alpha Homora V2 now is using Iron Bank, which is Cream V2, as a source of liquidity. So I think it's you can think of it as a whole big ecosystem, even though we're not actually same team. So that, I think that's what I like about it.
So tell my audience a bit more about the Iron Bank, because I think it may not be familiar to everyone, but it is quite incredible. So I'd love to hear you describe that.
Yeah. So with Alpha Homora V2, we can offer users to borrow multiple assets. So that's different from V1, in which V1 users can only borrow ETH. The reason that we can offer multiple assets borrowing is because we don't have to bootstrap all of these liquidity ourselves. It would take months to be able to bootstrap these liquidity ourselves, from ETH to USDT to DAI to the list goes on, right? We don't have to bootstrap ourselves because we are integrated with Cream V2 or the Iron Bank, which is a part of your ecosystem. And pretty much how it works is that Cream V2 whitelists Alpha Homora contracts to make sure that Alpha Homora contracts can borrow in an under collateralized way that Alpha Homora would use to in V1.
Wow.
But instead of borrowing from ourselves, it would be borrowing from Cream or the Iron Bank V2. So the only two protocols that can borrow in an under collateralized way from the Iron Bank are Alpha Homora V2 and Yearn vaults right now. So the pretty much the customers for the Iron Bank are limited to limit the risks as well.
That's really funny, right? Because you're kind of exploding my head here, because the Iron Bank is actually from Bravos, which is the Game of Thrones reference, and of course, Alpha. You mentioned Alpha Homora has almost a Harry Potter reference, so my head is kind of exploding with memes. but I think it's really great to have kind of your own ecosystem and to also have this kind of cross ecosystem collaborations, and that to me is so refreshing and exciting and powerful. So, I very much, Peter Thiel in his book 0 to 1 describes about this idea of trade. And the way he describes trade is he says, humans are good at some things and machines are good at other things. So you should think of them as countries and you should have the countries trade, right? Because that's because they're different and they're good at different things that produces the most value. So it's interesting that, so I would say, for example, how would you characterize the difference in the Yearn ecosystem, the culture, the governance model? What makes that one different from what you're doing?
I think it's, different in so many ways, on the product level itself.
Sure.
I think, let's say Alpha Finance Lab focusing on the end goal. So let's say what I mentioned is, maximizing returns and minimizing downside risk. So whatever products we build, we'll make sure that we work towards that goal. Versus, let's say Yearn, there are multiple products. They have different goals for each product, right? They may have the end goal that I may not know, but I think, what I see from your ecosystem is that it's huge and each of the product is huge in their own way. So I think that's one main difference. The second difference is, of course, Alpha token will govern the whole Alpha ecosystem with a number of these Alpha products. And the Yearn ecosystem has a number of tokens for each of their products, maybe sushi or cream or Wi-Fi. So I think that also is another difference. And the third thing is, I think that we are working towards the Yearn model is trying to decentralize our work a lot more. So that's something that we're in progress, and also making sure that we get there as soon as possible.
Wow. That is really exciting and refreshing. And, obviously one of the things that Yearn has kind of been an incredible pioneer of is almost like a sort of M&A type of mindset. So I'm wondering if you have any kind of thoughts around that. Obviously, you were talking about decentralizing your development initiatives, but like, is that inclusive of the possible absorption of adjacent products, or how do you see this kind of development?
I don't want to put that option out of the door,
Okay.
because I think anything is possible in DeFi,
Okay.
sooner or later. But that's not our focus right now. Our focus now is building more alpha products and achieving the goal. And I think what I think about M&A in DeFi is, it's a smart idea, and that's what we've seen in traditional world as well, where companies grow by acquiring other companies, and like what you were saying about trade, right? If like
Yeah.
company A is good at A, a company B is good at B, why not just merge and get the best of both? So I think it definitely makes sense. The tricky point is when, especially similar to traditional world, whenever M&A happens, there would be some changes in the organization. There would be, reorg, or the dynamic of the team will change. So I think it would be uh, like some, I would say some time that it would take to pretty much make it settle into the next ecosystem. So I think right now, the Yearn ecosystem is probably figuring out now, and feeling the shock from all these M&As. But I think they will get through it and pretty much enter the next ecosystem of Yearn.
Yeah, it is. It's, inorganic growth is very complex, and it has it has a property of leaps and bounds, but it also has a property of sort of disruption. So it's a very complex issue, particularly as the world has not yet wrapped its head around DeFi. So as far as DeFi M&A, right? So I think it's really this bleeding edge frontier, and it's astonishing to see the quickness of the evolution, not just of the space, but of the entire methodologies for deploying software, right? Like obviously open source is the beginning, but like there's so much more in the dynamism. I think the sushi embrace in YFI has just been that was an eye popping from day one. That was eye popping. So that it's sort of takes your breath away to see the velocity and to also see the kind of like inventiveness of this whole space.
Right. Mhm. Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah,
That's
fantastic.
big though.
So I guess I'd love to conclude on something that I like to call the big idea segment, right? Which is, I kind of jokingly ask people like, oh, what's the big idea? But like, what I'm really curious about is sort of like, I know that you expressed one of the pillars of your company culture, which is really to focus on the delivery of products that enable your users to gain sort of the maximum amount of the benefit with the minimum amount of the risk, right? So I think that kind of is almost a drive and a culture and a focus. And, I definitely understand that. But I think, what I'm really kind of reaching for is, what is the kind of big picture? What is the kind of like idea that it sort of has a multi-decade arc, right? Because we're in the transformation of the entire world, and obviously you've been from all the way from Berkeley, all the way through to these tremendous experiences you've had. Like, I'd love to kind of understand the arc of your, vision and where how you see this going.
Yeah. So the multi-decade, I'm glad you mentioned, because typically I usually don't mention the multi-decade goal because
Yeah,
it's like, a lifetime for DeFi, right?
sure.
And pretty much our goal and my goal is to make sure that Alpha Finance Lab uh, not only just innovate in DeFi, but expand the innovation to traditional finance by several things. So number one, we are actually partner with the venture arm of one of the largest commercial banks in Thailand. So even though the partnership now means, making sure we help each other develop the products, But in the future, hopefully, I really hope that it can expand beyond building alpha products, and to something that we can actually partner and bring more beneficial resources in DeFi to traditional finance and pretty much to their users and their customers.
Wow.
So that's the end goal. How do we get there? I think it really depends on the regulations, really depends on what the venture arm can do, limited by a number of things, limited by the fact that they are also under a bank. So I think we are working through that slowly to make sure that it goes as a smooth process. But that's the end goal for the multi-decade.
That is astonishing and fantastic and really exciting, And I think that in a sense, there's this tremendous kind of ecosystem that's developing in Thailand. With I think you already kind of work very closely with Band, which is I think a very famous Oracle project. And I think prior to that, I think Omise has some roots as well. So I think it's really exciting to see this kind of very powerful engine of DeFi, coming from this geography. So I think that's very good. I love the idea of bringing this combination of traditional and decentralized finance. Because I think from my perspective, I think that this principle of decorrelation comes across different inherent systems, right? And so the idea of it creates like a much more resilient system, because I don't think that DeFi is kind of inherently immune to collapse. I just think that it has different properties from centralized finance, and those different properties of transparency, of collateralization, there's so many factors that enable this decentralized finance to act as a incredible buffer for the kinds of, market shocks that we're seeing, almost on a daily basis these days.
Yeah, yeah. I think it operates in a totally different way, and that's when, that's when partnerships would make sense, right? Because two different worlds are offering two different things to each other. So hopefully we will slowly achieve towards the merging of the two, and I think that would be a very interesting point where we see, a real evolution in finance, and impacting like billions of people.
I'm so happy to hear about your partnership with the bank in Thailand, and I'm very happy to hear about your fairly conciliatory approach to centralized finance players. Because to me, I feel like there's a branch of DeFi that you might pronounce DeFi because they are defiant, right? That there's a group, and obviously we honor that and we honor them, and we think that that's a tremendous energy, right? It's an energy of revolution. But at the same time, I think that the world is quite large, and I think that we should have room for a lot of different players and mindsets. So I think that I really, value your mindset and, this kind of idea of creating harmony from such different worldviews and mindsets as traditional and decentralized finance.
Mm.
Well, this has been really tremendous. It's in a way like, I think there's so much that you have to kind of offer and teach. So, if you have any additional things that you want to mention, I just want to open it to you because, it's been so interesting.
Yeah, I think two things, right? Like one thing is, if anyone's watching this show, and still learning about DeFi or anything, just know that in DeFi everything is open. So if you have any questions, you can just reach out to the team, to the founder on Discord, on Telegram, and that's with any of the projects. And I think that is something that people who are outside of DeFi may not think of, because typically in our world, right, it's pretty hard to reach out to the founder of this company or something. But it's completely different here. So if you have any questions or don't know how to use a product, just ping us on Discord. Nipun and I are pretty active there as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, follow our Twitter. We have a lot of updates, constantly updating through Twitter. And if you follow our Discord and Telegram already, you would also see the announcements coming up pretty much almost every day on what's going on in Alpha.
That's fantastic. And of course, I think Discord has become sort of the DeFi communications channel of choice. So there's so many people active on Discord. So, I definitely recommend you to check out the Discord channel. So in terms of the website URL address, where should they go?
Yeah, so it's alphafinance.io.
Great. Alphafinance.io. You should definitely go there. From there, you can jump off to the Discord, you can jump off to the Twitter, and you can jump off to any of these very valuable online resources that learn a lot more about Alpha Finance Labs and Alpha Homora versions 1 and 2. And so I think it's been a tremendous show. Really, really appreciate you reaching out. And, I think the openness that you described is absolutely what I experienced, because we met on Twitter through DM, and you agreed to join my show, so I've been very happy and honored to have you here.
Thank you. Very glad to be here as well.
Great. Thanks so much.